Hi, I'm Lisa Rubel of Love to Color My World, and today I'm here with the second in my Pillow Talk series, where I'm going to show you how to make a knot pillow. You've probably seen these popping up on your Instagram feed or in home dec catalogs that you get, and they're really quite easy to make. The hardest part is figuring out how to tie the knot. So I've made two samples. I've got this one here, which is using a slightly wider fabric strip, and then this one, which is using a slightly narrower strip. I happen to like how the wider one looks better, so I'm going to do that for my sample today, but we'll talk about the measurements for both. When I decided to make one of these knot pillows, I wanted to use print fabrics instead of solids, just because I thought it would give it some added dimension and some texture. And so Benartech sent me some fabrics from their Palette Impressions line, and I really love how these fabrics have such an artsy feel to them. They look like they've been painted. And so I chose a couple in the teal family because those are colors that I really love. And then the fabric I'm going to be using today is this more multicolored one, which I think will be really interesting because it sort of has a stripe effect all on its own. So to make a knot pillow, you'll need 1 yard of fabric, and you'll also need some polyfill. I used a little more than a bag per pillow, so you probably want to have 2 bags on hand. And then some other tools that you may have around the house. You'll need a dowel to help with stuffing, and then some sort of tube, which also helps with stuffing. I happen to have a poster tube left over. You can also use a paper towel roll. You just need to have a tube that has a small enough diameter that you can slide your fabric tube over the end of it when it comes time to stuff the pillow. So let's get started. Our first step is going to be to cut our fabric strips to make into the tubes. Now for the slightly larger knot, I used 7-inch wide strips, and that just gave a little chunkier tube than for this one, the smaller one, which uses 6-inch wide strips. So it's up to you which one you'd like to do, but you're going to need to cut 4 strips by either the 6 or 7-inch width by the width of the fabric. So you'll have 4 basically 7-inch by 42-inch strips to work with. So I have a 6-inch ruler, and then I'm adding on an extra inch with my second ruler. And I'm going to cut my strips. Once you have all 4 strips cut, I'm going to go back and trim off the selvages at the end on each of the 4 strips. Then our next step will be to sew these strips together in pairs. So I'm going to sew them together using a straight seam just along one of the short ends for 2 strips, and then for the other 2 as well. So after I stitched the short ends together, I pressed the seam just in one direction. And now we're going to work with 1 strip at a time to make the tube. And what you're going to do is fold it in half with the right sides together, the whole length. And then we're going to stitch with a 1/4-inch seam allowance down those raw edges, and that will make us a nice long tube. So 2 quick tips when sewing your long strip together to make a tube. The first is to backstitch at the beginning and the end, because we'll be pulling on these stitches a fair amount as we turn it and stuff it, and that will just help to lock your stitch in place. And the second is to, before you turn it right side out, to fold one end over about 1/2 inch or so, like that, and then press it. And you want to do that because at the very end, what we'll be doing is tucking one end of the tube inside the other. And by having this pressed edge in there, it will make that much easier to do and have a nice finished edge. So once you have your tube all created, stitched together, you're going to start turning this right side out, and it'll take a while because you've got almost 80 inches of tube to turn, but I just sort of keep pulling from the inside until I have the whole thing turned. There are also some tools you can use to make turning go a little faster, but because this is a fairly wide tube, it goes pretty quickly just doing it by hand. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go back to where I had my pressed over edge, and you can see now it's tucked on the inside, and I'm just going to give that another press. And then the other thing you can do if you want is to press your seam flat. When you stuff it, that will help as well, but if you want to give it a little ironing help, you can do that too. And now it's time to stuff our tube. Now, I said at the beginning that you need some sort of tube that will help with stuffing. I happen to have this poster tube from my son's periodic table poster, and it's a little sturdier, so that works really well for me. And you want to make sure that whatever you have for a tube, that it will fit inside of your fabric tube. The other thing you can use that pretty much everyone has at home is a paper towel roll. And these work as well. They're not quite as sturdy, but it will work just fine for what you're doing. And the paper towel roll will fit around either the 6-inch strip or the 7-inch strip. There's a little extra room with the 7-inch, which makes it easier as well. It's a little tighter with the 6-inch strip. So what you want to do is tuck your cardboard tube inside your fabric tube and start sliding it up, and get as much of the fabric on as you can. What I ended up doing with the 6-inch tube, because it was a little bit tighter, is I was able to only get about half of it onto my paper towel roll. So I stuffed it halfway from one side, and then when I had that side stuffed, then I put the tube in the other end of the fabric and stuffed from that end as well. So that is an option. You can get pretty much all of it on to a tube. You might not be able to get it all onto the paper towel roll, but you'll get pretty close. And then what you can do is put a safety pin at the loose end, and that will just kind of keep the batting from coming out. We're going to sew at the very end, so you don't want to do that yet. So a safety pin there will just help the batting not slide out. And then just start grabbing chunks, slide it into the tube, and use your dowel to push it down. What you also want to do is keep a hand on, you gotta be careful your dowel doesn't push out the end. Keep a hand on the bottom of your tube where the fabric is shirred, because when you push with the dowel, it will try to push the fabric off, and you want to have some control over that, so it's not pushing the fabric off until you've got it kind of filled with the fiber fill. And you're not looking for it to be super firm. You can see it's got some give to it, and that will help when we go to kind of rotate it, but you also don't want it to be floppy. So you want it to have, a little texture to it. And like I said, between the two tubes that I used for my pillows, I used a little more than a full bag's worth. So that will give you an idea. And you can always sort of knead your fabric tube after you've filled it, and kind of help to spread out the fiber fill among your tube if you've got some areas where it's a little more solid and some areas where it's a little floppy. So keep doing that until your whole tube is filled. So once you've got both of your tubes stuffed, it's time to start tying our knot. And if you look at my tubes, you can see they're tightly stuffed enough that they don't have floppy spots, but they also can bend really easily, and that's going to be the key for making your knots. So there are a lot of different knot options out there, and you can do some Googling and find different looks and different ways to use your fabric tubes to make them into knots. I'm going to show you one way to tie a knot, and I chose this one A because it was pretty easy to do, and B because I really like how the knot looked when it's done. So let me show you how this knot goes together. So you're going to start out like this with a loop and a long end on the top and then this short end underneath here. And what you're going to do is take it over this first edge and then under that second loop edge and then weave it back and go over and then under, and then these two will connect. Okay, let me show you that one more time. So you're going to start out like this with your short end going under, then making a loop which goes under itself, and then this long end right here. And what you're going to do is take your long end and feed it over the top edge of the loop and then under the other edge and then back over and under, and then these two ends will meet here, and you can see you kind of have to play with it a bit, but you get that nice looking knot shape. And so what I'm going to do temporarily is pin these ends together. So what you can do is you can pin these ends together with your safety pins, or you can just go right ahead and stitch it. And you can choose if you want to hand stitch it or if you want to do it by machine, because your ends will be tucked in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to machine stitch it, and I've got that folded in edge that I created earlier, and I'm going to tuck the raw edge into it. This is not the easiest thing to do. So I've got the raw edge tucked in, and then I'm going to put some pins in. Okay, and then like I said, what you can do is either, whip stitch around that opening, or if you're feeling brave, you can stitch on the sewing machine. So I stitched mine by machine, and what I'm going to kind of do is shift how my tube runs through so that I can have that seam hidden, so that it's not showing. And we can do some more shifting after we get the second tube through as well, but I figured I'd give that a start. So once you've got your first knot wound up and then your end stitched together, what we're going to do with our second fabric tube is just to trace the path of our first knot, and that will make our fuller knot pillow look. So I'm going to find the seam, which is right here, and I'm going to start in that same spot. So I'm going to put that by the seam and then just follow my way along that first tube. So that will go there, and then I'm going to keep following it and winding this tube in to mimic the first one, and around there, and over and then under, and then make these two ends meet. So I've got to pull a little bit tighter to make that happen. They should meet right about there. And then I'm going to pin and stitch those as well. And what you'll need to do, whether you are hand or machine stitching this, is kind of pull on both those ends to give yourself some space here to be able to stitch, again, either by hand or machine. And then after that stitch, then we can kind of work on manipulating the tube to get everything spread out again. Okay, I've got my second end stitched, and I just need to manipulate the tubes a little bit to kind of even out my knot design, and then also make sure that my seams are hidden, because they aren't necessarily pretty because they were hard to do, and there's plenty of woven tubes around here to kind of get them tucked underneath and no one will even see them. So you want to get it so that all of your tubes are about the same tightness. Just kind of work on manipulating those a bit, and if you see seam lines and those bother you from sewing the tube together, you can kind of rotate the seams as well. You can see I've got some on the back, and there's one of my seams and the other one's hiding under there. Can't see it at all. And there's my finished knot. Pretty cool. Look at that. Lots of fun. So I hope you enjoyed the second in my Pillow Talk series. There'll be a third one next month, but in the meantime, if you make a knot pillow, make sure to share it with me. You can find me on Instagram at LisaErin1121 and also on YouTube, right where you found this video.